This is Ruth chapter 1, verses 1 to 18, and it is the introduction to the book, and it sets the scene for the story which will unfold. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech, his wife's name was Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem, Judah, and they went to Moab and lived there. Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah, the other Ruth. After they'd lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left without her 2 sons or her husband. When Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, she and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. With her 2 daughters-in-law, she left the place where she'd been living and set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. Then Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness, as you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." Then she kissed them goodbye, and they wept aloud and said to her, "We'll go back with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I'm too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight, then gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters. It is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand is turned against me." At this, they wept aloud again. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. "Look," said Naomi, "your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her." But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to leave you or turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me." When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. From there, we turn to Mark's Gospel, to Mark chapter 12, beginning at verse 28. And here we have a conversation which gets right to the heart of the matter. It's about the greatest commandment. One of the teachers of the law came and heard them debating. Noticing that Jesus had given them a good answer, he asked him, "Of all the commandments, which is the most important?" "The most important one," answered Jesus, "is this: Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this: love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these." "Well said, teacher," the man replied. "You're right in saying that God is one and there's no other but him. To love him with all your heart, with all your understanding, and with all your strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself is more important than all burnt offerings and sacrifices." When Jesus saw that he'd answered wisely, he said to him, "You're not far from the kingdom of God." From then on, no one dared ask him any more questions. This may be a surprise to you, But the Bible is not a book. Seriously. This is not a book. I know it's pretty well disguised as one. It looks like a book. It feels like a book. If you drop it on your foot, it does not feel like a book. But this is not a book. This is a library. In fact, the best way to imagine it is if you think of a bookshelf, a good cabinet full of weighty tomes. You know these book cabinets you'll often see on the television behind a politician who's being interviewed, and he wants to look on camera as if he's actually well read. You know, and you've got all these leather-bound things behind. And sometimes you look and you say, I bet you haven't read any of them, mate. Not one. Well, on this bookshelf, you've got weighty tomes, and they really deserve to be good, solid, leather-bound volumes. There's books of law, there's books of history, there's books of prophecy. And then in the middle of them, sandwiched between a couple of very big, heavy leather-bound volumes, you've got a little Mills and Boon paperback. Yeah, that's the book of Ruth. It's a gentle story, a gentle little book that's easy to read, a picture of ordinary country life, rather than anything particularly dramatic. It comes over as, well, ordinary country people in an unremarkable place that most people hadn't heard of. It's a backwater. It's love and devotion triumphing over tragedy. If you like, it's a Hebrew version of Mills and Boon crossed with the Archers. And there it is. What is it doing in the company of these solid great tones? Well, just listen to the way the story starts off. It begins with the death of the men of the family. It leaves the women with no support. Naomi and Ruth return from Moab, and they're in the hope of finding a future, some kind of future, whatever that may be. And as the story unfolds, Ruth works in the fields of her kinsman Boaz, eventually catching his eye and becoming his wife. There you are. It's a story with a nice, happy ending, beginning with the love of a daughter for her mother-in-law, ending with the love of a wife for her new husband. A lovely, classic love story, happy ending. There, sandwiched in between books of law and history. Why is it there? Well, it was debated in the first place as to what it should be doing in the canon, whether it should be in the canon. It was collected as one of 5 scrolls, which came to be associated with particular festivals in the Hebrew year. Ruth was read during the Feast of Weeks, which is a harvest festival, because the culmination of the story happens when she's working in the harvest in Boaz's fields. There were other great debates about what should have been there, whether this scroll should be in and that one should be there. I mean, the book of Esther was included. The book of Esther doesn't even mention God. Why was it included in the canon of Scripture? This was the kind of debate which took place, and Ruth found its place. Why? Well, let's look at a couple of reasons which are important then and now. First, Ruth was a Moabite. She wasn't a Hebrew. She was a Moabite. Now, Israel's relations with Moab, they varied. From open enmity to cooperation and alliance against a stronger enemy, particularly when the time came against Babylon. They were neighbors, neighboring states, separated by the Dead Sea. You could say it's a bit like Newcastle and Sunderland, separated by the rivers. Yeah, that kind of, yes. Let's leave that one there, shall we? In later centuries, long after the time of this story, the Jews became very exclusive. After the return from exile, as part of the aim to reconstruct Jewish society in the state of Judah, Ezra instituted laws which banned mixed marriages, and non-Jews in Judah were very much second-class citizens. The story, of course, is set centuries before that, in the days of the judges, long before such exclusivity. But it was told and retold and written in the form in which we have it, almost certainly, in these post-exilic days. And it emphasizes again and again and again that Ruth is a Moabite. But it doesn't just say that's who she is, it treats her with honor. She's a respected person at the center of this story. And it tells the story as it unfolds of her marriage to a respected Israelite, a man of some rank and status. And then finally, if you like, the punchline for those Jews who are saying that shouldn't be on that bookshelf, it says, actually, she's the grandmother of King David. Ah. So it is presented there as a telling salvo against those who are taking an exclusive line. Whether or not that was why the story was originally told, that's how it came to be written and presented. This says, no, your exclusivity is wrong. It shows that the generosity of God has got nothing to do with racial purity. And that's why the book of Ruth needs to be in our scriptures now. Because that's a word that still needs to be heard in every generation, in every nation, in this country, going back to the fascists of the 1930s, through the National Front of the 70s and 80s, to the sort of racist voices still shouting today, the hostility to asylum seekers and immigrants, arguments about Black Lives Matter, it should be all lives matter. Well, we know that, but etc., etc., etc. Racism still lurks in so many of our communities. Keep reading Facebook, Hexham Matters. It still comes up there. In this town, there are people who are being got at because they're not white. God created a human race full of diversity. Many different races, languages, cultures. We're rich and diverse. God absolutely delights in variety. He's not going to get bored by making us all the same. That doesn't happen. And how we have been enriched by so many different cultures, so many different races. Did anybody notice how many of the England team are not white? Yeah. Watch what happens in a couple of weeks' time when the Olympics start. How many of our athletes will not be white? How much of the music that you enjoy is there because of the influence of Caribbean or African or Asian rhythms and harmonies? And what about the numbers of great scientists who were either Jewish or Eastern European? And the great Christian leaders and preachers, Desmond Tutu, Mother Teresa, etc., etc. You could go on at length. God's family is rich and diverse, and that's the way he wants it, and we need to treasure that. Ruth was a Moabite. So, as the book says, the greatest of the Hebrew kings had mixed race ancestry, and guess what? So did the Son of God, because Ruth is one of Jesus' ancestors. At the heart of the book is something which is so important it must never, ever be forgotten. The supremacy of love. As the story unfolds, you're thinking, how on earth is this going to work? There were so many obstacles in the way of Naomi and Ruth. They were widowed and bereaved in a society which had no widows' pensions, no support for widows. They would have to support themselves either by begging or worse, prostitution. That was the state of play in those cultures. More than that, they belonged to different races, so they had to choose where to live. And whichever country they decided to live in, one would be resident, one would be alien, whichever place they went to. The obvious answer was to separate, but Ruth said no, under no circumstances, because she loved her mother-in-law. There was a bond between the two of them. It was love, and it must not be broken. And her love, as the story unfolds, brought its reward, the greater love and the promise of marriage to a rich, kind, and generous man. Real love can and does overcome so much, because this is at the heart of the issue. When Jesus and the lawyer discussed the most important commandment, this wasn't just a theoretical question. It wasn't just a test of orthodoxy, although it was that. The question you would ask any intending teacher is, so which commandment do you say is the most important? If they said Deuteronomy 6:4, then that's it. You're all right. So Jesus quoted it, the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one, etc. Yep, that's right. And then he said, and the second, hang on, that's not in the book. We don't ask for the second one. Love your neighbor as yourself. This was a conversation which took them to the center of the will of God as expressed in his law. And the law of God is not simply a matter of rules and commandments and instructions. It is about right and loving relationships between God and his people. The problem is, it's so easy to get tied up in the nitty-gritty, the details, the rules, and get so tied up with that you miss the point. The lawyer saw that true faith is not about the rules. It's not even about understanding God. I mean, let's face it, do we? Really? The more I understand, the more I know I don't understand. It's not about that. It's about loving it. And the more I know I don't understand, the more I'm glad he loves me because I love him. And that's what makes me go. That's what makes it work. It's very easy to make religion too much of the head and not enough of the heart. Yes, there is also a risk of making it so much of the heart that we forget the head. The balance has to be there, but the heart is at the heart. Ask yourself the question, at the end of any given week, in your way of life as a believer, you may have gone to a home group, you may have engaged in a fellowship meeting, you may have spent time each day in your own prayers and devotions, you may have been able to get to church in normal times, you may have received communion, etc., etc., etc. And at the end of that week, if you're checking, do you understand God more? I get a bit more. And I'm glad about that. But what's more important to me? Yes, and that's love. He loves us and he helps us to love him and take us deeper and deeper into that relationship. If I look back on a week when I've done so much and get to the end of it and thinking, hang on, where was God in this? I've missed it. And yeah, I've had weeks like that. I'm very, very glad that in my retirement, I no longer go to church councils, circuit meeting, and committees and stuff. I pray for those who do. The day after my last meeting in active ministry, which happened to be a church council, and God grinned and says, go on, do one. My sister-in-law rang up and said, congratulations, how did it feel to be retired? I thought, what? I said, I'll tell you what, I'll let you know in about 6 to 8 weeks' time in September when it's Synod Day and I'm not there. Oh, we don't have to get tied up in stuff like that. But if out of that does not come a sense of, I'm with God's people and I am loved and I love and we live and work in love, then we've missed it. Understanding our faith is so important. Yes, I understand that. Both for our own good and for the benefit of those who ask us questions. How are you going to explain what Jesus is about if you haven't understood some of it? But the heart of it, the heart of the good news is God is love. If there's no love, there's nothing except leather-bound books on the shelf behind you that you might never have picked up and opened. The book of Ruth is a heartwarming love story. It might even be what you could call a feel-good story, given to us to make us feel a bit better. But it's about love. The heart of it is a warm and generous love which overcomes all obstacles to enrich people and enhance life. That is the love which God has for you, for each one of you, for us together, and the love he wants to grow in us for each other and for all.